Welcome everyone to Canada's big FinTech show. We're just going to wait a few minutes before everyone or while everyone joins, and we'll be getting started shortly. But so yeah, I'm really excited to be chatting with you both today. Yeah, so kind of to kind of discuss, the general topic about what we're going to be doing is talking about finance, how COVID is kind of affecting it, and everything there. So Ginger Baker, your head of financial access, Plaid, Kaz, your VP and GM of financial solutions at Shopify. So I think we're really going to be able to have a really interesting conversation here today, not because only, you guys have great financial backgrounds, but Kaz, you also bring that small business side from Shopify as well. So really interested to kind of get your guys' input today and start chatting.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'll start off. Ginger, why don't we start with you? I think we'll start really basic. Why don't you tell us about your role at Plaid? I know you didn't join too long ago, and kind of the work that you guys are doing in financial access.
Sure. Thanks so much, Megan, and thanks for having us. I'm excited to engage on this topic more deeply today. Yeah, so I've just joined Plaid recently within the last few months to build out a new organization at the company around financial access. And the idea behind this group is to ensure that the tools and technologies that we've been able to provide to developers and fintechs over the past 5 years, we're also able to provide to more established financial institutions. And that has benefit not only for those organizations, but it also has benefit for the people who use those institutions as their provider. So it's giving financial institutions access as well as people access to the tools that they need for a healthier financial life.
Mm-hmm. And Kaz, tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing at Shopify and the financial solutions team.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So I've been at Shopify for about a year. I'm the vice president of a team that we call internally Shopify Money. For some reason, externally, we call it financial solutions.
Might sound more fancy or something.
I think it becomes more acceptable on LinkedIn than it does but so the team is responsible for essentially every time Shopify touches something money related. Our job is to help merchants start, run, and grow their business. And we focus a lot on the frictions created by the existing financial system and how we can make that go away. Mm-hmm. We provide like Shopify Payments, which is like the best payment provider on the internet for our merchants. We have Shop Pay, capital and banking solutions for all of our merchants. And the goal essentially is to help create the next generation of Allbirds, Gymshark, and Bombas, so that a mom in Florida or a college student in New York can create the next great D2C brand.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm sorry, go ahead, Ginger.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Megan, I think everyone should know, and Kaz and I should apologize in advance, that we've known each other for some years and have had a lot of experience with kind of loose yet educated dialogue on various topics. So if things go a little off track, it's just our friendship showing through. So thanks in advance to everyone for their patience.
Yeah, I promised everyone this is coffee, despite the fact that Ginger and I are I think we've done this conversation over stronger drinks.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Well, my goal then is to get you to say those things you guys said over stronger drinks to tell
nice.
I'll work on that throughout the panel. Throughout the next hour. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so you guys actually do have quite of a shared history. I know you both were at Facebook. Was that at the same time? You guys, is that where you guys? Okay, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we literally sat 2 rows from each other. Just close enough that I could toss, pieces of paper or pencils at Kaz during the workday.
There you go. And then Kaz, you had Cash. Was that after Facebook? That was after Facebook, correct?
No. So I had so I spent my whole life in this weird intersection of like money and computers.
Yeah.
Like I hacked my first credit card terminal when I was 14 and like built my first payment business in college. Turned out building a payment business for college students is a terrible idea. And I like had a bunch of startups. Cash was the last one that got acquired by a large financial services company in 2017. And then I went to Facebook after that. And then after Facebook, I came to Shopify.
Yeah. And I ask you guys this because you guys have been working, kind of both of you have been working in this financial space for quite some time. And I feel like the conversation we're going to have today will be super interesting. So why don't we dive in with a little bit more of like Shopify and Plaid? So, Shopify you work with small businesses, e-commerce, Plaid more on the financial services API side. Where do the two organizations collide? Maybe Kaz, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think like I think we have goals that work relatively well with Plaid's goal, right? Like if you think of we think of our job is to make things that used to be difficult easier. So lots of people work in jobs they really dislike because they think starting a business is difficult. Our job is to make it easier so they can all quit their jobs and start businesses. That's our general ethos at Shopify. It's like power the next million generation of businesses. And I think we work with Plaid because I think Plaid thinks similarly about the world. Things that used to be really difficult without Plaid have been made easier. And we use Plaid in a bunch of our products, but most prominently, we use Plaid as part of Shopify Capital, where using Plaid allows us to expand the group of people to whom we can give funding so they can all quit their jobs and start businesses.
Right, which is good for Shopify.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of those things, right? That we think of ourselves as the brand behind brands, and it's the motto of the company is to arm the rebels, and first, in order to arm them, we first have to get them to become rebels. And it's been, I think that companies have been working together long before Ginger or I were actually at either company, and I think it's been a great learning experience between the two companies.
Yeah, Ginger, from your perspective, talk about that connection between Plaid and Shopify.
I think it's great, the complementary natures of the businesses, where Plaid is an enabling component for businesses like Shopify to be able to better serve their end users. And we take great pride in being that enabling tool for businesses to help their users. And so it does have a really nice complement. I think also just from a mission orientation, we've been very focused on democratizing access to payments and democratizing access to financial services. And I know that Shopify shares a lot of that mission as well. And so the two things are a very natural partnership.
Yeah. And to kind of dive in, the one thing we're really here to talk about today is how COVID-19 has not only obviously changed all of our lives in the past 6-7 months, but how it's really changed the financial landscape. And I know, Kaz, I'll throw this to you first, because you and I have actually had a conversation already this year when Shopify launched or announced Shopify Balance, about how at the beginning of COVID, I think like many businesses, BetaKit included, we sat down and said, whoa, we got to change things here. Like, this is completely different. And you and I have talked about how Shopify kind of pivoted some of its, or a lot of its focus to COVID. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was a very interesting moment in time for Shopify, but I like to think about it from the point of view of our merchants. I have a merchant I like, my mom. My mom's a Shopify merchant. And when COVID hit, my mom picked up the phone and called her bank and said, hey, I need money to get through whatever this is. And the bank at the other end said, cool, could you please fax us a 5-year business plan and your last 7 years of tax statements? She waited on hold for a couple of hours, and then that was the ask. And this is a really weird thing, because like most of our merchants and most of the world, my mom doesn't have a fax machine.
Right. Yeah.
It's just not a thing that people have anymore. And she also, most of our merchants and most new businesses, she doesn't have a 5-year business plan. That's just not how modern business works.
Yeah.
And the guy in the green visor at a bank looking through statements is just not a thing that works in this new world. So all small businesses got left behind, in Canada. It was just a very bad moment for small businesses in Canada. And for us, it was a country-wrecking moment, right? It was everyone who was supposed to help merchants wasn't there. So we at Shopify said, cool, we'll do it. No one else is. So we'll just
right.
We put, I think the week it hit, we put an extra $200 million into Shopify Capital to fund more businesses. We've now funded, I think, $1.2 billion worth of funding for merchants over the past few years. And it's been really the merchants who would get rejected by banks, who would get left behind because the bank business model doesn't work for them, or they don't have the banks don't have the information they need to make the right decisions. And this has really changed all that we've done. And we've we expanded capital in Canada and the UK. We announced Shopify Balance, which is launching later this year. all these things are designed to tilt the world. Like the entirety of Shopify is an exercise of like moving the Overton window in favor of small businesses. And it's been an interesting few months in that.
Yeah. And I find, Shopify Capital's been around for a little while now, recently launched in Canada. But it seems with Shopify Capital, the expansion you guys have been doing there, and also with Shopify Balance, there's this focus where, and just so everyone's aware, obviously Shopify became one of the most valuable companies in Canada during the pandemic this year. So really interesting time for you guys where you're expanding a lot. But I feel like there's been a strong focus, especially from your team, on now the finance side of things. How does that kind of play in, obviously talking about small businesses, what's the effect there?
I mean, look, so the reality of the situation is like Shopify is a place merchants come to work. Like it's where they go to work. It's their office. Like they do their inventory there. They like deal with the orders there. They deal with customers, stuff there. But up until recently, like every time they've had to deal with money, they've had to log out of Shopify and go to some crappy, terrible experience that just sucks for them. And like in a world in which big businesses are making decisions on like complicated software with lots of FP&A teams, and small businesses are making the decisions using a shoebox full of receipts, small businesses lose. And like our entire job is to even that playing field. So that's why like it's not because we want to be in this business. Like our job is to solve problems for small businesses. This is a very large problem. Like the banking sector works really well for Shopify and really poorly for our merchants. So our job is to, build products and help the banking system move to a modern world so that our merchants have a fighting chance.
And Ginger, I feel like that's a really good transition to kind of bring you into this conversation, because to me, that sounds a lot like what Plaid is looking to do as well, is create, make it more open and easily accessible when it comes to the finance sector.
That's right. And I think, the experience of COVID, especially earlier in the year, was certainly a learning experience about how important it is to digitize these services for people and for small businesses as well. And when COVID first hit, we saw something like a 44% increase in new users just in that March to May timeframe. So we saw just incredible growth across all of the apps that were connected with Plaid as people began to realize not only for convenience sake, which was normally how we thought about digital tools, but now during COVID, it's much more diverse, right? The need is control and the need is protection, right? People actually had to turn to digital solutions so that they didn't get sick when they went into the bank branch. Right. And so I think like it was just a very interesting shift that probably, took our expectations for what we would think would happen in 3 to 5 years and moved it into 3 to 5 months. And so that's been really, interesting to watch. And we're seeing, I think that this trend is going to stick as well. We did a survey recently that shows something like 73% of people think that fintech and digital services are now the new normal. And so 80% of people think they can manage their financial life outside of a bank branch. So it's here. And so, whether or not we were prepared for it or not, like this happened very quickly. But it's exciting to see, maybe it's the only silver lining of COVID, but it's nice to be able to find one.
Yeah, I think you guys bring a really interesting perspective, because Ginger, with Plaid, you're in the US. You bring that US perspective where there's been, more adoption with financial services, where Kaz, from the Canadian perspective, it's actually pretty lagging here in Canada. The statistics are still pretty low in terms of consumers that might use a competitive financial service over their bank. So maybe let's talk about, and I don't know if it's something you guys have talked about in the past before, but like the differences between Canada and the US, and how, even though COVID's creating these opportunities where you need to go digital, Canada's still behind in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a blessing and a curse. So the Canadian banking system is like very well established with very like few like big players with like these trusted brands, which has made some things easier, but it has made innovation harder, right? Because in the US, there's like over 10,000 banks, and you can usually find one who's willing to work with a fintech. In UK, there's a very good, robust regulatory system that encourages fintech enablement. In Canada, we have neither the competition nor the good regulatory framework. But like, we have a couple big banks that everyone trusts. So it's not like but it has made, I am actually really worried about this because I think it's going to lead to a situation where Canadian innovation is going to fall behind because, there aren't that many people who can play ball at the other end of the world. So I'm encouraged by some of what's happening, but if you compare Canadian fintech innovation to what's happening in Europe and UK, I mean, that's just like, we're not close, right? And if you compare it to what's happening in the US, enabled by a lot, by the way, by Plaid, like if you think of like what's happening in the US, that's not happening in Canada either. And we're in a very odd situation. And I don't see, like, I think there are paths forward, but that's still to be seen.
Yeah.
Ginger, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's different frameworks that have been adopted in some of the countries that Kaz just mentioned, which might be worth taking a look at, right? And the difference between some of those countries versus Canada. Like in Australia, for example, which we would view as probably the most progressed in terms of consumer-driven finance, where you have a very open finance-oriented model as opposed to just open banking. So consumers can permission their data regardless of what type of account that data resides in. So not just banking and checking accounts, but also other kinds of accounts such as payroll, pension, et cetera. And so that just allows for so much more flexibility and freedom in the way that innovation can take place. In the UK, obviously way far advanced in terms of the number of years they've had regulation in place, but it's really specific to transactions. And so it'll be interesting to see what Canada does, right? I think the Financial Data Exchange has now just moved up into Canada, which is a US-based organization. And Plaid's a very active member of that organization, but it'll be interesting to see like what kind of direction can be set there. Our hope is that it's certainly focused on all kinds of financial accounts and that consumers have that right to be able to permission their data. And I think having that as the baseline, which we do have in the US, it allows for much more innovation and more companies to come in and participate.
Yeah. I think a really interesting and tangible example is in the US when it came to the PPP loans. There was a lot of fintechs that got to be involved in that. Whereas in Canada, we had a group of fintechs, ask the government, hey, can we be involved? And we're shut down. So I think there's a lot of, really interesting and intangible examples.
Yeah, I think in the US at least, and it'd be interesting to know how this all worked in Canada. In the US, I think it was something like 6% of the PPP loans were distributed through fintechs. And it was, the fintechs that PayPal, Cabbage, Square, Venmo, I think, were some of the players involved in that. But they were able to capture a sizable share of that important moment this year.
Yeah, in Canada, that wasn't really the case. It went through essentially crown or government organizations. And Kaz, I don't know if you kept up with
it was fax machines in Canada. It was like, it was not I mean, look, we had I'm vegetarian by marriage. And we have a Shopify merchant called I've Got Plants in downtown Toronto. And that merchant would not be able to get access to Canada's equivalent PPP loans because it would just take too long to actually go through a process. So like the alternative for that merchant would have been Shopify Capital. And it's not a great thing for the world that the alternatives, like we have to have these alternatives because the existing infrastructure doesn't work well for small businesses. Now, like we were very happy to help companies like I've Got Plants and all these other Canadian merchants across the country with capital, but it would be much better if the playing field overall was better for small businesses. And it just so happens, look, if the only players in the world are banks will do what they're incentivized to do, right? Which is serve very large companies like Shopify. And like I pick up the phone, 7 bankers pick up the phone on the other line. That's not true for small businesses. And you need companies to be able to fill that gap. Otherwise, small businesses suffer. And this is, by the way, why like people think of, Silicon Valley has become popular, so people think small businesses are thriving, but they're not. The percentage of people who are starting small businesses is the lowest it's been in history. The number of people starting small businesses has gone down almost every year. It's actually recovering a bit this year, but it's miserably low. And it's lower in Canada than it is the US. And if small businesses is the main driver of the economy, we're in trouble.
And I was going to ask a question, but Meagan, I think that's your job. So
no, I mean, if you have a question, please feel free. Yeah.
Yeah, it would just be interesting to know, like, why do we think that is, right? Is it because they don't have access to the tools and services that the larger businesses get? Is that really what it is? Or are there other things going on over the course of the last couple of years that are?
Well, I mean, I think it's like, if you look at, like, you know, the prospect of small business succeeding, people make relatively rational choices. Mm-hmm. Like, it actually is hard to compete with large businesses. And if you don't have access to capital, if you don't have access to tools large businesses do, if you don't have the same, like, you know, it used to be that a local flower shop was where you went to get your flowers, right? And that has become incredibly difficult. The guy in the local branch of the local bank who used to help the local florist set up their business, learn what payroll was, learn what balance sheet was, learn how to make financial decisions, that guy got fired in the 80s. And like, it's been like a downward decline since then. And I think we're seeing a new generation of like digitally native small businesses grow up. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like, there's hope there. But we could use a lot more help helping them grow.
How do you think COVID has affected that, though? Because we have seen, like you said, an upward trend. More people are actually starting businesses, maybe because they were unemployed due to COVID or whatever it was. There are more people taking that entrepreneurial route in Canada anyway. So what do you think the effect of COVID is on that? And then obviously the government here in Canada has been very focused, or, you know, talking about small businesses and making sure that they can survive this. So how do you think COVID affects it?
I mean, you can't have rainbows without storms. It's actually like true. Like, rainbows only come after storms. And I think this is one of the upsides of like this new world that we're going into, is that people have realized that the stable thing they thought was stable maybe isn't as stable. And there are new opportunities that are of like self-actualization, of like owning the thing that is part of you. And I think that's like and look, companies like ours, both Shopify and Plaid, are doing a lot to try to make this easier for folks. And hopefully we're succeeding a bit. Hopefully there are small businesses, like, I know this is true because I have friends who started small businesses who wouldn't have started it without companies like ours. So I think we're at an interesting point where I can see the scales tilting, but they're not there yet.
Right. Yeah, we for Plaid, we are trying to be more involved in helping the small businesses, especially the fintechs, those voices be heard, you know, through some of the accelerators and industry groups, and helping to represent those voices on a more national scale. I think that applies in both US and in Canada. So that on the financial technology side, we can help make sure at least that those foundational pieces are in place for businesses that want to use it and get started.
Yeah. Moving away slightly from the kind of small business perspective, let's talk about open banking. Because I think, you know, this whole conversation that we're having is kind of around this idea, you know, encompassed by open banking and trying to shift and move. We've talked a little bit about already how Canada is a little bit behind in that. But I'd really like to get both of your perspectives on, you know, where the US is at with open banking versus Canada, and where both Plaid and Shopify fit into that at this moment. Ginger, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talked about this a little bit already, but I do think this concept of open finance is a really important one to continue to talk about. Open banking is, and for those folks in the audience who may not be as familiar with these terms that we talk around.
Yes, sorry, I should have introed it. It was in the notes, I just forgot.
Open banking has really been around, you know, consumers' ability to permission their data that comes out of financial accounts. The bank and checking accounts. But in places like the United Kingdom, I think it's really been oriented around transaction information only. Our view is that that's pretty limiting. And if COVID has taught us anything, or this year has taught us anything, like, we can't predict the future. And so making sure that we're building flexibility into the way that we can innovate around financial services is super important. And so instead of just open banking, looking at the broader picture of open finance, which includes access to all different kinds of data types. For example, like, if you look at the data that we have for our use cases in Canada, if you were just doing the standard version of open banking, for example, where it's only transactional, it would something like 5 to 7% of the use cases are covered for Plaid. So that leaves a 93% gap in what people actually want to do with their finances. And so I think, opening up that conversation to make sure that we aren't pigeonholing ourselves into something that is, too narrow, and that we're building both technology in terms of API-led data exchange, as well as frameworks that enable innovation and flexibility as the years go forward.
Kaz, from a Canadian perspective, where do you feel that we're at there? Obviously in Canada, for those of you who might not know, the Canadian government actually had some open banking consultations they were doing over the past year and a bit, but were paused amid COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what Ginger said is like incredibly important to like think through about like the consequences of limiting the scope of these things. If you end up having terrible decisions get made in a way that destroys many small businesses. I mean, like, I think the part of the problem is that folks only think of like, the things they can imagine. But what we've learned in software is that the things that are important are the things you can't imagine today. And if you limit the playing field to only things that a bunch of lawyers in a room can draw up, I say this as a lawyer, like the world will be a crappy place, right? D. Hawk didn't invent Visa with with some like random group of lawyers in a room. It's just like, okay, let me go make this thing work. And the laws were like relatively free to let him do that. And what we have is a bunch of people who went to law school with me, limiting like the scope of innovation. And that's just not good for the world. It just is bad for, it's bad in a world, and as a Canadian, I say this, Ginger, Canadians generally don't like shit talking Canada in front of Americans.
I know that from my Canadian friends, guys.
It would be shameful if Canada is the furthest behind of every country in the world on open banking, which is, I think, like very likely outcome if we don't take this more seriously.
I also think that there's, an important other framework here, which is not only getting the right frameworks and structures in place in a room full of lawyers, as Kaz mentioned, but really being mindful about what people need, like what kinds of services and solutions do people actually need, and taking a very customer-centric view to all of this. I mean, that's the whole reason we're here, right? And Kaz cares about small businesses because they hire people and they're started by people. Plaid cares about enabling other businesses because people get benefit from that and their lives become richer and more fulfilled. And so I also think it's important to have product and designers and people who are thinking about user-centric design as part of those conversations, so that we understand like what are the needs that people are facing today, and what are the kinds of potential solutions we could see. What does embedded finance look like over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, and how do we put technical and regulatory structures in place to enable those things to be real?
And Kaz, just to go back to kind of the Canada focus there, how much do you think, pushback from incumbents in the big banks is going to kind of affect this shift?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not like, luckily Ginger and I have different jobs, and that what a part of my job is not talking to banks all day, very frequently. That's like, it's an upside of my job. But I do think there's, look, I think there are some banks that are very smart about this and are realizing the value of applications built on top of the banking system. If you look at our world at Shopify, for example, the thing that makes Shopify magical and makes more and more people come to Shopify is the Shopify App Store, where hundreds of developers are working all the time creating things that we could never imagine to create. Just not part of our, like we don't have the end, like we don't have all the, like we can't imagine everything. We think we're decent at our job. And I think our banks have to think relatively like intelligently about this. So I'm hoping that when folks get in a room, that it will opt for more innovation rather than less innovation.
And I think you've seen some openness to, especially in Canada, banks being more open to working with financial or fintechs, for example, like fintech startups and stuff like that. But there is obviously still some pushback. And
I was just going to say, like, Kaz and I do have different jobs, and I do get to talk to the financial institution and quite enjoy it, Kaz. So
you're much more pleasant than I am, though, Ginger. You're just much more pleasant to talk to.
But there is a very significant role for the banks to play. And, as we see the recognition of the power of digital tools, especially this year, banks are going to be instrumental in ensuring that everybody has access to those tools. So, 100%, not 100%, a huge majority of my focus right now is how do we give financial institutions themselves, the traditional banks, we're speaking with all of the top 5 banks in Canada. How do we make sure that they have access to the same tools and technologies that developers have had so that they can also deliver on digital roadmaps and further the solutions and offerings that they have? It isn't just about enabling the fintechs, although that's a very important component of this that drives competition and innovation as well. But the big banks have a very important role to play.
I think it is a bad thing for the world if data lives on mainframes that require COBOL code to get access to. It's just like honestly, you can't imagine. If you were designing a new world, you would not say, let me take a bunch of important information and make it so no one can access it, including the people who need to access it for their own finances. That just feels like a system design failure.
Yeah, one of the very specific ways to help is, and not to plug products here, but we did launch Plaid Exchange this year. And the whole intention behind Plaid Exchange is that we can drive, into the future with API-led solutions for data exchange and get away from this, the screen scraping methods of the past, but, drive everybody towards secure and robust methods of exchange. And I think that having the solutions available as well is also an important component of this so that, it is a big investment, right? And there's always trade-offs, especially for incumbents who are, working on many other things. Like, how do you trade off the investments between driving towards new and innovative solutions and protecting what you're already doing? That's pretty common. So we're here to help with Plaid Exchange and other API-based solutions.
Yeah. Speaking about incumbents and fintechs and stuff like that, I don't think we can talk about that today without mentioning that obviously, Plaid and TD is kind of currently pursuing Plaid over US branding stuff. Now, Ginger, I'm not interested in talking about that, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. What I am interested in talking about though is how you feel broadly, what do you feel the challenges are when Plaid is trying to work, as you've been talking about today, with these incumbents and connect fintechs? What are the challenges that Plaid is still facing in this landscape? Because we've seen they're very clearly still challenges.
Yeah, part of it is it's a little bit about what I just said in terms of, disruption causes friction. And so orienting everybody around what disruption in a way that's mutually beneficial looks like. Yeah. I think the biggest piece is education. I think I haven't been at Plaid for very long, and I think there's a lot of places that we could further educate about what Plaid's intentions are. Even the fact that Plaid Exchange exists and that we are trying to build solutions and drive as fast as possible away from screen scraping, I think is a misnomer right in the market. I think people think that we still want to be doing screen scraping. And so there's a number of different areas that we could work to further clarify. And that education isn't just specific to the financial institutions themselves, but it's specific to how this industry is going to work as we go forward. We need to have that education with policymakers, with consumers themselves, with our trusted partners like Shopify and others, to just talk and lead in what direction this industry is going to go. And so I think that will be part of the solution.
Yeah, and we've very much been talking about Canada, but clearly still, even in the US, when we talk about how things are going and progressing for fintechs, there are still these challenges. So I guess my next question then goes to you, Kaz. And, we've already kind of talked a little bit about Shopify Capital and Shopify Balance, but I think I had talked about some really interesting things earlier this year about what Shopify is doing with Shopify Balance. While I know you guys have yet to launch that, how do you feel that is, going to change things moving forward for Shopify and for small businesses?
Yeah, look, I think it'll be, the way we think of Balance is that, internally we call it the better than bank product. The idea isn't to replace banks. That's not what we think we're doing. We think we're solving a software problem for our merchants. The idea is to help our merchants make smart decisions about their financial lives. And I'm super excited that the early designs are out and I've seen them. And I think it'll actually be it'd be an insanely good product for our merchants to get launched. And it's similar to the idea of what we've done elsewhere in Shopify. And like the entire like reason we go to work is to remove friction from small businesses. If you look at the work we've done in checkout, for example, like, I don't know, it's not not that many people in the world get up in the morning and say, how do I make checkout better? But we do. So like with Shop Pay, we've reduced checkout from 16 fields to 2. That's a meaningful difference in the lives of our merchant. It actually makes it makes it far more likely for our merchants to succeed against the largest players in the world if they don't have to ask the consumers for their address. Because the consumer feels safer, feels like there's something here that they don't have to give me all the information, have to fill a bunch of forms to actually buy something. If you think of the work we've done, with Shop Pay installments, I'm super excited about it. We are launching the ability, giving consumers the choice to spend in a way that used to be only available to people who get like an Amex charge card. Like this democratization of payment choices is like incredibly important, and it's like the reverse side of what we're doing on the B2B side with Balance and with our fraud protect products. So I'm super excited about what's coming down the pike. I think we are making a meaningful difference here for our merchants.
And hopefully Canadian companies will be able to use those features in Shopify Balance at some point in the near future.
So this is like a number one question I get. This is like the number one question I get from on my Twitter tweets is people like saying, when is Shop Pay coming to X market? Shop Pay is available in Canada with Shopify Payments. We're like super excited about it. It's actually has very high uptake. We have like we launched Capital this year, and we're an international company, but we're very proudly Canadian. So hopefully we'll have more and more products launching in Canada soon. Mostly because my mom needs them. And her store's in Thornhill, so
Yeah, exactly. And I have to ask, obviously, because I don't even know if I introduced myself at the beginning of this, but for goodness sakes, BetaKit being the national publication that covers startups and innovation in Canada, we obviously get a lot of questions about the Canadian focus there. So our audience is always interested in that stuff as well, aside from your mom, obviously. Or maybe including your mom. Maybe she reads BetaKit. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
BetaKit.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. All right, so I think we're coming almost to the time where we're going to have the audience ask questions, but I do have a couple final questions for both you, Ginger and Kaz, just in terms of what you think the future is going to look like. So we've talked about COVID, we've talked about open banking. I mean, no one really knows what the future brings because we're still in a global pandemic, but talk to me about where your head's at in terms of the future of finance in Canada, US in the next year or so. Ginger, would you like to start?
Yeah, just a quick stab at it. I mean, I'm excited about what we haven't envisioned yet. I think that in so many areas of technology, the apps and the tools that we use do the work for us in a very deep way. I'm not sure we've quite gotten there yet with financial services. Like if I think about just how easy the algorithms are with Netflix knows more about me, what I'm about to do. And so do many of the other digital tools I use, but I don't feel like I'm there yet with financial services. And so where can we be in 5 to 10 years so that before I'm even thinking about it, or if I'm in the moment of a financial component of that experience is taken care of on my behalf. And, maybe that's, I'm about to buy something large and my paycheck isn't going to be here for 2 weeks. And the app I'm using knows to give me a certain amount of credit without me even having to ask for it. Or we start to see the evolution of apps that help you to manage your debt without you having to, on an Excel spreadsheet, like outline each of the individual rows. What's the interest rate? Which one should I pay first? What are my student loans? And so I'm eager for us to get there. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think we can do it. Like if we put, again, flexibility and frameworks into place that allow for the innovation. I think for both fintechs and financial institutions, like we can see some really interesting stuff.
Kaz, the future. Tell us everything.
That was like a really good answer. I'm not going to be nearly as insightful as Ginger. Look, I am highly optimistic about what is coming down, because we see what our merchants are doing and how they're like succeeding and how they're like being very resilient. And there's a weird thing that happened this year, which like 2030 happened 10 years earlier than was planned.
Yeah.
And so the rest of us who have my job and Ginger's job are just trying to catch up and figure out, okay, well, like the financial system was already 20 years behind, and now the world just moved 10 years ahead. So now instead of 20 years of catching up to do, we have 30 years of catching up to do.
That's so true.
But I'm highly optimistic about what's coming down the pike in financial innovation, especially on the stuff that I have control over at Shopify, which is like the work we're doing on B2B and merchant-led initiatives.
Okay, super interesting. So we've got some interesting questions coming in here. One that I'm really liking so far is, what are some of the areas you're seeing the most growth in Canada when it comes to fintech innovation? What areas do you think are most behind as well?
So I have a couple of stats here about growth investment.
Go ahead.
Apps, which I think is interesting. And I have to caveat this because I'm not 100% sure if this is specific only to Canada or includes the 300% growth, right, in investment apps. And so I do think that we're starting to see some of these tools come into play that are just starting to have exponential growth. Investments has been one that we're seeing really interesting.
Okay. Guys, did you have any thoughts?
I think we're behind across a bunch of areas in Canada, and I think that what is super interesting that I think I'm optimistic on is the number of startups that have been started in Canada in the past 4 or 5 months. I've seen quite a few new startups. The one area that I think we're definitely ahead in the US on is taxes. I think the best tax product in the world is Simple Tax, and it's a Canadian product. And so, but on other areas, I do think we're further behind than we should be.
Okay. Another question we have coming in here is actually not as much related to financial services, but I'm very interested in this one as well. What are some of the immigration challenges in the US and companies going remote? Like Shopify, obviously, we know earlier this year you guys did a remote by default decision, I guess. So how do you think, sorry, reading word for word here. What do you think could potentially have an impact on innovation in Canada when it comes to immigration challenges and being remote? I guess that's the question. Sorry if it came across weird.
if you're watching this in the US, go to h1bengineer.com, which will forward you to Shopify's career website. We are hiring. We're hiring everywhere. And if you're in the US and your H1B is about to get canceled or delayed, h1bengineer.com is your path to permanent residency in Canada or a place that you're choosing. We'll move you.
I did not mean to make this a promotional moment for Shopify. I apologize to everyone. No, that's really well, there's an interesting conversation around there, Kaz, because I think a lot of Canadian companies really have been, Canada has been known to be more open when it comes to tech talent and highly skilled talent, especially then lately compared to the US. So I think there's been some really interesting conversations around that for sure. Ginger, I did interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Ruthless. He knows what he needs in engineering talent, and he will go and try to source it from the US.
Yeah.
I was just going to say we have a growing team in Canada. We have folks, about 10 I think folks there right now, but we will be hiring for more roles in 2021. So I'm also going to plug a little bit since Kaz did it. If folks are interested in roles from Plaid in Canada, we're certainly interested in supporting that. I do think this. I don't know if the question was specific about our employees and adjusting to COVID and how that works. I mean, we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And make sure our employees can be effective from anywhere they need to work during this time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Next question I have here, Ginger, is for you. What do you see as the next frontier of open finance for Plaid in Canada?
Yeah, so I think we're interested in seeing how this consultation with the Canadian government plays out towards the end of this year. I know that the delay here has probably given some of the fintechs more of an opportunity to have a voice and how this unfolds. But we're really eager to see the adoption of frameworks very similar to what we've seen in Australia and what we're aiming for in the United States as well. And I think there's alignment on making sure that the frameworks that we put in place and the solutions we put in place are very consumer oriented and are meeting the needs of people. And I don't think there's any disagreement about that. And so it's just about the next phases and sequencing about how do we get there. And so that's something that we're really excited to be participating in and through FDX and being involved.
Yeah, I think that was actually going to be my question to you, Ginger, is how much does FDX, the Financial Data Exchange, play into that, having recently launched in Canada within the past few months? Oh, I'm not sure if we can hear Ginger.
Sorry. I think it's a great venue for, can you hear me now?
Yep. Sorry, I think there's a little lag there.
Normally the internet is, okay. So sorry, normally the internet connection is pretty good in Half Moon Bay, but we are like towards the coast. And so it's generally not quite as strong as some other areas of the Bay Area. But I was going to say, I think FDX is an important step. And, we worked with, we were part of helping FDX expand into Canada. And so I think that will be a good forum for folks to be getting on the same page about how open finance can work in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. This next question is both for Kaz and Ginger. Maybe Kaz, you'd like to start on this one. What role should e-commerce marketplaces play in filling the financing gap not met by traditional financial institutions? My goodness, can't talk. This is pretty much what we've already been talking about today, but I think it's a really direct and good question. So what's the role that e-commerce is playing in filling these gaps? I know, for example, obviously we've seen Shopify Balance, we've seen companies like Wave in Canada do it. And there's been, I think in the US also like Amazon and Walmart introducing some of their own credit financing stuff. So what's the role? E-commerce filling that financial gap?
I mean, I think there's there's a Hayek quote there somewhere, like plans by the many, not plans by the few. Like I want as many players in this space as humanly possible. I want all the financing solutions, all the payroll solutions, all the payment solutions. Like we want as many of these things out there as possible, because there's no way that any one of us can control this and do a good job alone. And frankly, like the gap between what small businesses have and what they need is so massive that the more the merrier. I honestly don't think of like, the way I think of these things isn't that, they're competitive to our products. I actually want, like, we all do better in the world if if the world doesn't end up being just one place where you can buy everything. That would just be a really bad outcome for the world. Mm-hmm. And we do better when there are the small businesses in rural Canada and in like downtown cores can succeed. Mm-hmm. And in that world, we need lots of providers. So I'm really happy when all the big companies from the Bay Area come down to Canada and provide services. We want more of them.
Yeah, and one of the questions here, Kaz, is also is Shopify offering a line of credit to their merchants in addition to Shopify Capital? And I guess we should have been clear about what Shopify Balance is earlier. Is you guys launching a more banking, credit card, like those type of financial offerings are exactly what Shopify Balance will be when it launches later this year?
So Shopify Balance will launch later this year. The team jokes around that we're the only ship that leaks from the top. So I try not to pre-announce things before the team's ready to announce them. But the goal of Shopify Balance holistically is to give merchants the solutions they need to start, run, and grow their business. Mm-hmm. And one of those big problems, obviously, is financing. Like financing is a massive problem. And we're super happy to be involved with it with Shopify Capital, and we'll be as involved as possible.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, well, I really appreciate you guys being here today. I think this was a really interesting conversation. Hopefully our audience felt the same way. So thank you both for taking the time out of your day to sit down and chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.